But I do want to welcome everyone. I'm so excited. This is our first opportunity and our first chance to have this live chat. And I hope this becomes um, a a regular thing for the Irish Cultural Center here in San Francisco. So before I begin, or before our wonderful guests begin, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Anne Cassidy Carew. I am the new Cultural Program Director here at the Irish Cultural Center in San Francisco. I am joined this evening by our wonderful librarian, Jennifer Drennan, who is our co-host and also tech guru of the evening. And then we have two very special guests, Sister Mary Teresa, who is in Texas. Wait, hold on. She's in Austin. Is it Austin, Texas?
Oh, San Antonio.
San Antonio. Darn it. I knew I was going to get it wrong. There's so many cities in Texas. And we have Mael, Brigde, who's in Vancouver, Canada. And I'm going to let each of them introduce themselves and give us a little bit about, their connection to this wonderful saint and goddess and prophetess and patroness. Because I just have to tell you, I have to chat just a few more minutes, but I didn't know very much about St. Brigid. I have to be honest. I was raised Irish Catholic by my mother, who knew every single other saint out there. St. Jude, St. Christopher, St. Anthony. I mean, of course, we all knew St. Patrick, but I did not know very much. I mean, and I hate to admit it on an evening like this with with people that are probably very much more knowledgeable of St. Brigid. So I started to dig a little bit about Bridget, and I'm sold. I am now an admirer. She is definitely somebody that she's pretty dynamic. And so I'm very excited about hearing more stories about her. And I know that there are two guests this evening will be full of wonderful stories. And what I started to as I did start to do some research of my own after speaking to both of them on this, before we met this evening, I love the idea that she has this extreme duality, this Christian faith and like kind of looking up to heaven, there's St. Bridget, but also this goddess earth worshiping and honoring the earth, and so like she just has this amazing mythology and legend, and she's just such a dynamic and like a trifecta character and a woman, and so what an honor. And I do thank you both for joining us this evening. Sister, I'm going to start with you, and if you could just introduce us who you are, and just a couple minutes, let us know, that would be great.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be with you all. My name is Mary Teresa Cullen. Most of my friends just call me Mary T. And I'm originally from County Tipperary, Ireland. I went to a Brigidine sisters secondary school. And to be honest, I learned very little about St. Bridget there. But for some reason or another, I was drawn to the Sisters of St. Bridget and entered that community. But again, while the community I joined was founded in 1807 in County Carlow, Ireland, a place called Tullow, and it was in the Diocese of Kildare and Loughlin, and of course Kildare has been very much associated with Bridget. And now when I entered the community, really there was very little focus on Bridget. It was much more on the Bishop of the Diocese who happened to found us. However, we do owe a little bit of myth making to him in that he named us after Bridget. He founded an order of men the next year, and he called them the Brothers of St. Patrick. I guess in today's terms, he would be considered very nationalistic in that he gave the two kind of main Christian Irish saints of the time to us as names. However, it was not until 1993, I came to Texas in 1962, and I still can't draw like a Texan, sorry, or sometimes I'm glad. But in 1993, I happened to be back living in Ireland that year. And that was the first year of the Féile Brigde conference in Kildare. And interestingly, the President of Ireland at the time, who was a lady, Mary Robinson, she was supposed to relight the Brigid flame in the town, center of the town in Kildare. And because the Irish government got into some kind of a situation that year where I think the government collapsed and she had to go to Geneva, as a result, I had the honor of relighting the Brigid flame in Kildare, which is, I think, again, a link with the pre-Christian Celtic goddess Brigid and the Christian saint Brigid. But as well as that, Sister Rita Minahan, who's now living in Kildare at the Hermitage and Solas Brigde Center there, she and I were asked to do a talk on Brigid. And really, we had to do a lot of homework very quickly. We talked to a number, there was a Benedictine monk, Sean O'Duin. He was a great Gaelic scholar, and he had read a lot of the original works in the Gaelic language, and in fact, even in the Old Irish, not the one I myself would have learned in school. And we talked with a number of people who had studied Brigid, and as a result, we did that first Féile Brigde conference. It was entitled Brigid, Prophetess, Earthwoman, Peacemaker. And really, that's really what whetted my interest in Brigid. And since then, I've kind of made collections of her myths. I take up maybe most of the archives here with articles and legends and materials that I have, accumulated over the years. So I feel that she is very much a woman for our time. And an interesting thing happened to me over this past week. Like, I have a couple of teachers in the next generation of my family, and they have been sending me videos, clips, and different things during the week. And when I was in elementary school in Ireland, I don't ever remember hearing a legend of Brigid. But this year, the children throughout the country have been learning some of the poems about Brigid, the legends. There are even little songs written now, like Brigid Brings the Spring, that are beautiful and easy for children to learn. So my sense is that there has been a whole revival in Ireland and a whole interest. And you may have also heard that there's a movement, especially among the women of Ireland, to have a second or a national holiday for her feast, just as they do for St. Patrick. So I think
that's great. I'm going to pause you for just a moment because I want you to continue with some of those stories, but I want Mael, Brigde, our other guest, just to kind of give her introduction and her connection, and we will come back. This is amazing. Wouldn't it be great to have a St. Brigid like national holiday in Ireland? Oh, that'd be so awesome. So Mael, please introduce yourself and let us know your connection to St. Brigid.
I will. And I was just sitting there thinking I could just sit and listen to Sister Mary T the whole time.
Ditto.
So I was raised Catholic in Canada, and I also never heard of St. Brigid. Obviously heard of St. Patrick. Something funny just happened to my screen, but I'll just ignore that. Yeah, sorry, I just got a little distracted there. I didn't hear about St. Brigid until it was in the early 80s, so it doesn't matter how old I was. And at that time, I had left the Catholic Church long enough to realize that there was a real hole in my life, that I wanted to have that kind of spiritual connection that I had in the church. But at that time, I didn't feel like I could stay in the church just because of the level of sexism that I was dealing with our particular priest and whatnot. So so I started looking around. I wanted a more feminine a goddess would be nice, I thought. And I was looking through books and I found something about St. Brigid, just a little tiny bit about her, and the mention that she was also connected to a goddess. And that really appealed to me. The whole thing about her, the perpetual flame and how long the order lasted, because she was alive in the mid 5th century. She was born. And so just that heritage really appealed to me. And at the time, I couldn't find very much about her. I think in our library, there was Lady Gregory has a book of saints, can't remember the name. So there was a chapter on St. Brigid. And there was a book by Alice Curtain, which is one of my all-time favorites. I reread it a year or so ago, and I still just love that book. But that was all I could find. I couldn't find holy cards or medals or anything. And then in 1993, again, on St. Brigid's Day, I had organized it beforehand, but on that day, I lit her flame again, because I thought it was outrageous that this flame had been extinguished, not once, but twice. And I wanted it to be present in the world again. So I had assembled a group of friends, women. Some of them were pagans, some of them were Christians, some of them were atheists, but they thought St. Brigid was cool. And we just decided that we would tend her flame. And we've been doing it ever since. Not all the same people, but I've been doing it ever since. So.
Well, thank you. So you have written a book, and you have talked about how, in our conversation previously, you said that it was something that you had put together. It was like, it took a period of 10 years. Will you talk briefly about, what that looked like, and what kind of took it so long? Like, was it something that you just 10 years of your life for a book is a really long time, but what was the kind of you finally realized like it was done and ready? So what over that time, and then finally, how did you get there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was involved with these women, the Daughters of the Flame, over many years, and I kept looking for more information about Brigid and trying to deepen my understanding of her and my connection with her. One of the things I love about her, short tangent, is that it seems like no matter what is going on in my life, there's a story or some kind of, I can find in her lore, some kind of a message that resonates with what's happening with me and in the world. And so I find it very reaffirming. And also, there was no liturgy. There were no prayers that I knew of or anything like that. So I just started writing my own. And then in 2011, I think, I got cancer, or I discovered I had cancer. And then I really started writing a lot, of mostly at first prayers and then later just poems. But I just really felt the need to get stuck in with her while I went through that process. And in that year, I ended up writing almost 200 poems and prayers, every bit of lore, every aspect of her that I could come across that resonated in my brain became a poem. So I didn't actually set out to write a book. I just did. And then I wanted to sort of consolidate it into something and write some essays in it about how I became connected with her, the changes that I've seen. Like I said in the beginning, there was almost nothing I could get. Now there's so much. It's like an avalanche of information and misinformation and art and songs. And I mean, there's just so much film. there's just so much celebration of Brigid. She really resonates for a lot of people. So was that brief enough?
No, that's great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sister Mary, when we spoke, you had so many wonderful stories and legends about her. If you were to pick, your top two, what would they be? And I know that's probably going to be really hard, because I think the night that we chatted for an hour, you were like, I think you told me about 15 different legends and stories. And I was like, I became a believer that night. But what would be your first, like your top two favorite legend stories?
I think one of them would be the legend of the harps. There's a story about how she went to this king chieftain to get the release of a captive. And while she's, they're really making her sit it out, and they're not really responding to her request. So basically what she looks around and she sees these harps hanging. I guess it sounds like it was some kind of a big hall of the king of Leinster, maybe, I don't know all the details. And as you know, these legends are told with a little different twist by everybody. Somebody said to me recently, the Irish never let the truth get in the way of a good story. And I think that's true of our legends too. We kind of add and subtract a little bit to fit the occasion. But anyway, she inquired if there were any children in the household, and they said yes, but they said nobody knew how to play the harps. So she sent for the children, and instantaneously almost, they learned to play the harps. So when the king came in, he was so taken with the beautiful music that he heard that he offered her like half his kingdom or whatever she wanted. And she said, well, I want the release of the captive. It's maybe there's a little bit of humor and cunning in it as to the way she secured the release of this poor man that she wanted and was being tortured, I think, and held in captivity. But I think it's a good story. And I think, again, it illustrates, it reminds me a little bit of the gospel story too, of, how set the captives free, that notion. So
she was a very cunning woman. I mean, when you think about
very
when you think about some of the stories, I mean, there was also the story of the cloak, like where she went to go and speak to, I guess,
King of Leinster, or the chieftain who owned that particular
area. And she, you tell it, you did a great job with it. I won't do it as well as you, but that is a great story.
Yeah, I like that one too. That would probably be my second, although it's very hard to choose. She actually wanted land for this double monastery. As you know, it supposedly was the first time in Ireland that there was a monastery of men and women. And don't forget, she was in charge, because it was not a diocesan system. It was a monastic type of system where the abbess was in charge. Now, she did actually get conlet there. And I've been in the Anglican church in the cathedral in Kildare has a picture of Brigid on one side and of Conlet on the other. But seemingly, she had decided that's where she wanted her monastery. And in fact, Kildare, it says it's a legendary kind of name, where Brigid found her heaven and the wind is whispering through the trees. That poem about Kildare was written by a Norwegian lady who they're actually called the Sisters of St. Brigid in Norway, but I digress. Anyway, go back to the cloak. When she wanted this land then for the double monastery, she went to the landowner of the area, and he refused to even listen to her. But she persisted, and that's very much who Brigid was. She didn't take no for an answer on the first go. And eventually he said to her, almost like jokingly, I'll give you as much as your cloak will cover. So she got some of her community there, and one went to the north, and it was a small little cloak. One went to the north, another to the south, another east and west, and the cloak kept advancing until it covered the whole Curragh of Kildare, which is an area today where a lot of horse racing takes place. And it's actually, among the locals, they call it Bridget's Pastures. And there's a lot of areas. They often do a walk of the Curragh around her feast day. And there's a lot of areas with names associated with Bridget around that area. So it's another example of her cunning to get what she really needed and wanted. And so he was so taken that, you know, he gave her, then he couldn't go back on his word, so to speak, and gave her all this land for a monastery.
So thank you, sister. Those are two. I love both of those stories as well. Mael, do you have a legend or a story that you, like one or two that you have a favorite? I'm sure you know and are familiar with some of them after all of your research now.
Yeah, and I have the same problem in there's so many really good stories, but and I think the ones that often come to my mind, most often come to my mind, are similar in that they're about her finding ways to help people who are marginalized or oppressed or enslaved, whatever, in danger. The one that you told about the man in the prison, that's one of them. Another one that comes to my mind, but I can't remember the details of it really well. I believe the way it goes is that this woman, there was a powerful man who wanted to enslave, for sexual purposes, a woman who was, I think she lived on her own. Anyway, he accused her of losing or stealing something of his. I think it was a vessel of some sort. Anyway, the long and the short of it was she couldn't come up with it. She couldn't give it back. And so he got to have her. And somehow Bridget intervened. I think she was able to say, like, if you go to this place by the river, because he had thrown it into the river himself. She never had hold of it. If you go to this place, you'll find it. And of course it was there, and it saved the woman from a pretty lousy fate. And then there's the one with the fox, which was similarly awful in that this man quite innocently killed a fox, just thinking it was a wild fox. And it was actually the trained fox of the king. And it could do all these amazing tricks and dance around and whatnot. And so the king was so furious that he said that unless someone could find a fox that could do all those things, which of course no one's going to be able to, the man would be killed and his wife and children would be enslaved. And so Brigid, hearing of this, did two things that she often does. She prayed really hard for some help, and she leapt into her chariot and went over there, and again asked for him to be released, and was told that he wouldn't be released unless this fox would come. Well, as she was traveling there, a wild fox, God sent a wild fox who jumped into her chariot and just sat with her as she carried on. When she got there, she said, well, in fact, I do have a fox who will do this. And so the fox came out and did his thing, whatever, entertained the crowds. Everyone loved the fox. The king was happy, released the man, and the man went off in relief. St. Bridget went home, and then the fox snuck back into the forest and went home, and nobody could find it. And so everyone was free. Even the fox wasn't enslaved. So all went well. That's one of my favorites.
Thank you. Do you have another one? I know that, like, sister was telling me there was about 34 that legends or stories that I didn't even have any idea, but a lot of really amazing stories that kind of, my next question is about, she was a woman way before her time. I mean, we know that she lived during the 5th century, and what she did, even, you know, there's stories to be told, right? So again, sister, you had said a lot of the stories that we now know today were based on oral, you know, stories. And you said that really at the end of the day, that we should recognize those oral stories are just as important as the ones that are actually written, because there's a reason that they've been shared generation after generation after generation, right? The importance of that. And so do you have an example of, you know, her being this woman way before her time? And you know, what do you think of that? I mean, just the idea that she is this trifecta example of, you know, myth, legend, saint, goddess. And so within that, there is, I mean, a woman in the 5th century doing things that were no other woman really were doing. And so do you have a story or something that you could kind of talk about with in respect to that? And I'll start with you, Mael, this time.
Oh, okay. Well, what pops to mind is when her family wanted to, her brothers and her father wanted to have her married, and her father found a poet, which was a very high status person, probably the highest status person you could be in medieval Ireland. And so he found this man for her to marry, but she didn't want to get married. She wanted to be a bride of Christ. And so she said no, and they said yes. And she it's a bit gory, trigger warning. She poked out her own eye because one of her brothers said something about her beautiful eyes or something like that. She poked out her eye and said, so is this still a beautiful face that you think you can marry off? And her brothers, of course, she's also bleeding. Her brothers are now, they're alarmed for her, and they say, no, stop. And so she heals herself, but she isn't forced to be married. Although, if I remember correctly, she does a bad turn to the brother who forced her the most. You remember this, right? Didn't she maim him in some way or something? There's a few angry saints out there. She mostly finds her way around that sort of thing. But yeah, so anyway, I bring up that story because that was not what was expected in society of a woman. At the time that she was wanting to take holy orders, she was in a minority. Most of the people in the country were still of the old religion, and she was in a new religion. And at that time, there weren't communities of sisters and whatnot. People would live with their families who often didn't support their decision to be a sister at that time. So the fact that she not only made that profound decision and got them to let her do it, but the fact that she then went on to form, as I understand it, quite a few communities around Ireland, is just amazing. She did incredible work in advancing Christianity in Ireland and shaping it. You're mute, Anne.
Sorry. She was a healer, and she was a blacksmith. Like she was like, there's stories about her being related to, like, with the blacksmiths. And then she was a landowner, and she was a bishop, which I love that story of the bishop. Sister, you will have to tell that story. It's pretty funny. And, you know, just the idea that she's a patroness still to this day. So sister, what would be kind of your thoughts with the idea that she was a woman way before her time?
Well, I think, as you were saying there, in regard to her role in the church, just that legend of that this Bishop Mael, who there's different versions of it. Some say it was when she was taking her vows, and that instead of kind of confirming her vows, that he said the words of consecration of a bishop over her. And there's other versions of it, that she went to the what we call today the sacrament of reconciliation, or in the old days confession, and that he got muddled up on the words of absolution, and that he said the words of consecration of a bishop. And supposedly somebody said to him, well, you're after using the wrong words. And his response was, what I have said, I have said. And, you know, again, it kind of emphasizes the fact that that story has lived and come down. And in fact, one of my nephews got married in a church in Dublin called Colester. And there's actually a picture. When I got a picture of their wedding, lo and behold, were they under the picture of the bishop, you know, with confirming that status on Brigid. But there's, you know, there's a number. One of the other legends that I'm very much taken with, especially in view of, let's say, hunger in our world today and the present pandemic and all the rest, is the legend of the apples. And we have a beautiful painting here where I live that an Australian artist, Gail Donovan, she did about 16 silk screens of artistic work on Brigid, but the one that we got from her is the legend of the apples. And the story is that, you know, she was on a journey. This well-off lady met her and gave her a basket of beautiful red apples. And, you know, they were done up beautifully and so on. But then along came a group of poor, hungry people. And of course, Bridget right away shared the apples with them. And because a lot of the stories are about her generosity, her hospitality, you know, the cow gave milk 10 times a day. She gave away the beef that was in the pot on the stew, and when she went back, it was replaced and so on. But in this case, after she gave away the apples, the lady who was the donor said, you know, I gave them for you, to you, not for them. And Bridget's response was, what is mine is theirs. And I think that kind of sums up a little bit of her outreach and her wonderful, caring kind of hospitality to all.
And again, it really represents, like, you know, that wasn't typical for, she was just this bigger woman. Like, she just had this amazing dynamic. I need to know more. Like, I'm so excited, like, to just hear about her and who she was. And just now, I mean, I'm sure there's scholars that have done more, you know, have dived deeper. And so with that, let's talk about kind of the pagan goddess side of her. Sister, we'll start with you. You had mentioned that you, in 1993, when you got the opportunity to light the flame, and you and Sister Rita, you know, wrote or presented the I think you called it Prophetess, Earthwoman, and
Peacemaker.
Talk a little bit about that, because that side of her is really also very fascinating. As you can see, I found this wonderful image, my background image, of kind of that goddess and that saint. And so, Sister, will you talk a little bit about that and what you presented in 1993?
Well, Bridget is often called a threshold woman because she lived, you know, in fact, there's a legend that she was born, her mother had her with one foot in the door and the other foot out of the door. Now, again, you know, think of that maybe metaphorically of that she crossed two worlds. Ireland was very much, you know, a country of kind of the Druids and the Celtic gods and goddesses that was common at that particular time all over Europe. And so a lot of the features of the goddess, and there was an ancient European goddess called Brigid, usually spelled Brigit. And so she actually took on a lot of the features and the characteristics of that ancient Celtic goddess. And so I think one of the things about, you know, and it was true of Patrick too, to some extent, that he kind of built on the Celtic traditions rather than, you know, throwing out the baby with the bathwater, as sometimes happens when something new comes in. He kind of, like, and a good example of that are the wells. Like the well in the Celtic tradition represented the body of the goddess, kind of the connection to the womb of the earth. And what seemed to happen with Patrick bringing Christianity into Ireland was that they became holy wells. And, you know, there's a beautiful, there are wells. One of the things that I did when I was living in Ireland for the year was to try and visit as many of the wells as I could. And of course, they have been very much improved. Like the main one in Kildare now has a beautiful statue of Brigid holding up a light that was done by a woman, a sculptor, Annette McCormack. And it really is a beautiful sculpture of Brigid. But there are other really nice ones too all over the country. In the Scanner, County Clare, near Athlone, as you go toward the west, they're all over the place. But I think the whole idea that, you know, many of the things that were associated with Brigid traditionally were also characteristics that were associated with the goddesses in the pre-Celtic era.
Thank you.
So it wasn't a real, you know, demarcation. Many things kind of welded together, I think. Now, maybe Mael knows more about that than I do, but I wouldn't say that there was a big break between the two, you know, that she took on many of the features that had been associated with the goddess Brigid.
Mael, will you share your kind of experience? I mean, you've been talking about originally you started in 1983, kind of the more mythical, spiritual side, that kind of goddess side of St. Brigid. And I think your new book that's coming out in September is that more of that focus of St. Brigid as the goddess aspect. Will you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. It's hard for me to say whether it is more the goddess. I have tended to think of her as a goddess, but I also know that most of the stories that we have, most of the even associations that we have for Brigid are like the spring, and by that I mean the changing season. That people tend to say the goddess is a goddess of spring. She brings the spring, but there's nothing in the goddess lore, the little that we have, because not much survives, that associates her with the spring at all, or any season. But the saint is strongly associated with the spring. So I think what's happened is that we've blended the two together, and in a way the saint now looks a bit more like the goddess, or a goddess, and the goddess looks a lot more like the saint. so whatever I call them, they're both there, and I really treasure that about her, because that, going back to the threshold, she encompasses many thresholds, including bringing pagans and Christians together in a way that I haven't seen I haven't seen it in that way. There's tended to be a lot of distrust between the two communities, but with Brigid, there's so much coming together. Pagans go to the festival in Kildare, and so I think I talked down a rabbit hole again there.
Oh, it's wonderful. Thank you so much, Mael. So this is our final question, and then I want to leave a few minutes if there's anybody out there that might have a question or two. But the final question is, and you may have answered it with all of your wonderful responses this evening, but why do you think she's still revered after, basically 15 or 1600 years? I mean, churches are being named after her still today. Like, we have a St. Bridget's Church. It's closed here in San Francisco, but it's still standing. And, Sister Mary Teresa, I'll start with you. Why do you think St. Bridget is still revered? I mean, you even said in the beginning of our conversation that Ireland is now thinking, or there's consideration of turning St. Bridget's Day into a national holiday. So why do you think that is? Why do we think that we've turned that corner finally?
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that she speaks to the issues of today. People find her relevant. I found it very interesting just reading some of the materials that have come out within the last week or so, how many are associating her with some of the issues that we're grappling with today, maybe especially in the church, because like I saw references to her as being the patroness of domestic violence, of women especially involved, the patroness of anyone abused by clergy or otherwise, the patroness of women pregnant outside of marriage, which, as you know, if you've been following the news from Ireland, has been very much an issue in the news right now because of the children's homes and so on. Now, maybe they're the more, upfront and extreme examples of it, but I have found that people are just being able to find in Brigid somebody who speaks to their lives and the particular moment that we're at right now. And I've absolutely been bowled over by, the interest that seems to be out there among people who, may not be that church connected with any church. But I've also found that she speaks well in an ecumenical way too, because during the year that I spent, I was back living in Ireland for about 2 or 3 years. And during that time, like I remember there was an elderly man in Kildare, his name was Tyke Hayden. He has actually written quite a bit on Brigid, some really good material too. And he was the principal in the vocational school there in Kildare. And he was so connected to Brigid, and there was tremendous collaboration between the churches there in Kildare. And he, so much so that he wanted his vigil service to be in the Anglican church and his liturgy the next day to be in the Catholic church. Just, that's just one small example of how she brings people together across denominations. And as we were saying earlier, no religion, atheist, pagan, Christian. I think there's something about Brigid that everyone can find in her. And for me, that kind of explains. And I think because of the legends and everything, she has a lot to offer children. And that's why I was so thrilled to hear that there's a whole curriculum in the schools now around Brigid. Now, maybe because they're virtual in school these days, one of my nephews sent me his illustration on a whiteboard of how he was teaching his children to draw a St. Bridget's cross. And I was intrigued by the way it was done. I'd never seen it done like that before. So it's, again, just, I think the fact that she's so versatile in in responding to different situations and speaking to the issues of today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mael, what are your thoughts about how she's, still is such an important part in, 1600 years later?
Yeah, like why of all the goddesses in Ireland has Brigid become the pop star, and I think it is because she's saint powered, because there's so much in there. And I agree with everything you were just saying, Sister Mary. And I would add that she also is a good model for modern slavery as an ally to people who are in that situation. And what I find I connect with a lot of mostly pagan people who are very committed to Brigid. Some of the people that I work with are Anglicans, United Church, whatever, but they're all people who have a real devotion to her. And what seems to come up the most often is that the safety that people feel with her, that she is an ally. She fights your corner, but she also has this huge gentleness to her. Like, she seems although she can get a little touchy sometimes, she also has a huge diplomacy to her. The story that often comes to my mind is about these men. They've made a vow together that they're going to kill this fellow. I don't know why. So they're going off to kill him, and she meets them and she tries to elevate their thoughts, and they're not going to be elevated. They've made a vow, and when you make a vow, or an oath, there's not a whole lot you can do. You have to go and do it. So once again, she prays very hard. And what she ends up having happen is that the fellows go off and they think they've killed him. So they've discharged their oath and they come back drunken and happy. But it was all an illusion. And so the man is still just doing his thing somewhere else unharmed, and to me, that's an incredibly diplomatic, she's found a way that everyone is served.
It goes back to her being so cunning. I love her. She must have been a redhead. No, just kidding. Okay. I mean, if you look at all the images of her, she is a redhead. I mean, look at this. Wait, on this side, look. I mean, I'm sorry. She's lovely. So we have about 7 minutes, and I just thought if someone wanted to put into the chat a question for either one of our guests, and then we'll start to wrap this up. Do we have any questions in the chat? And then I can read them to them so we're not all trying to talk at the same time. So if you have a question and you want to type it into the chat, that would be great.
Hello.
Hi.
My name's Lena. I wanted to know if a person wanted to be a Celtic witch, do they have to be from Ireland at all?
Not at all.
Because, like, say I want to praise Bridget, but she's a Celtic witch, so I was like, if she's Celtic, she's either Ireland or Irish. I'm like, I'm stuck.
Sister Mary or Mael, do either of you want to answer that? I think I think either both of you would be able to say that it definitely doesn't have to be Celtic.
No, definitely not. I think that's the interesting thing about her, is that her appeal crosses all kinds of boundaries.
I was just asking because I was reading books on her about Celtic witchcraft and all that. Yeah. And she came into view, and I really enjoyed the book, but I felt like I had to be from Irish or whatever. I'm from Kansas.
So we have somebody with us this evening that I know is fifth generation San Franciscan. So, you know, her Irish lineage goes way back, and so there is, I think you make the connection to St. Bridget, and she's going to be your friend. I don't think you have to be, you know, Irish, Celtic, or any of that.
Well, I just thought I had to be Irish.
Nope, not at all.
I'm like,
No worries. We have two other questions, so I want to just be mindful of everybody. So one of the question was, any stories of the feisty side of Bridget? Do either of you have a feisty? Now, I think Sister Mary Teresa, you talked about where she went in. There was something about somebody was sick, and then she went in, and then he became a believer, and that's when the St. Bridget's cross came to be.
That's the story of the Bridget's Cross, that this chieftain or something, she went to, you know, to see him. He was very ill, and the carpet of the day would have been the rushes or reeds, you know, they grow mainly by water, that the original Bridget's crosses were made from. And that as she explained, you know, the Christian message to him, that she wove the cross as she was talking with him. And of course, she won him over. But one of the ones, if I can make it real fast, that I like is, it's more feisty, is the one on the salt. See, salt would have been a great preservative and very important in those days because there was no refrigeration. So she saw this man passing by one day with a bag of something on his back. And she said, "My good man, could I have some of that salt?" And he said, "Oh, no, that's not salt, that's rocks." And so he goes on a little bit anyhow, and she says, "I think it's salt. Could I have some of that salt?" And he said, No, sister, it's rocks." And she said, "Well, then rocks let it be." And the poor man collapsed under the weight of the rock and went back and gave her the salt.
See, she can be feisty. I love that.
Right.
There was a question, it says, wondering how we effectively work in the US to create programs in the United States to honor Bridget. What would the panelists like to see? Do you think it's possible to do anything here in the United States with honoring St. Bridget?
I think it is. I live in San Antonio, Texas, and we have a group of maybe about 50 men and women lay associates, and most of them are Hispanic because this is a very Hispanic city, San Antonio. And we have every year for St. Bridget's Day around this time, except this year, we've done, you know, some stories of Bridget, and they just love them. I mean, I was just reading some of the responses today in emails where they missed. We did send them a couple of links to some of what was going on in Kildare so that they could tune into that. But I don't think it's something that they find foreign, or, you know, I think it, again, as we were saying earlier, it speaks to a lot of people, irrespective of what their background is.
Yeah, and I don't live in the United States. I live in Canada, but I know there are a lot of people and a lot of groups within the United States that where people are devotees of the goddess Brigid. And some of those people do work in the community. A lot of people who are devoted to Brigid are healers, or a lot of them are healers, or poets, writers of different sorts. I've met a few smiths, but not very many. But you can use those talents that you have, that you see a connection with Brigid, and take them into the community. I mentioned earlier that she built communities for sisters in Ireland, but we can use that to build our own communities. You know, we can use that energy and that example that she had and the feistiness she had in getting supplies for it, to do that in our own community. So I think that the world's your oyster. If you have that motivation, you can do it anywhere.
Well, I just want to say I am so appreciative to Mael, Brigde, and from Vancouver, Canada, and Sister Mary Teresa from San Antonio, Texas, that have joined us this evening. And I'm a believer. As I said, this is now going to be like my new like honor to St. Bridget. And Lena, definitely, if you are a lover of St. Bridget, she's for the taking. And as somebody mentioned, you know, all you have to be is Irish at heart, but that's it. And so I want to say, if I could applaud, you know, both of you for your time and your efforts. It was just a wonderful, wonderful experience to listen to you both. Don't forget, Mael's book will be coming out. Is it September?
August 27th, I'm told.
August 27th. So keep an eye out for that. We'll post it on our, oh, there it is. Yay. You know, I'm going to be asking you for a signed copy. I'll be sending it to you. And no. And so we'll get one to Sister Mary as well. And so I just want to say thank you to you both. And thank you to all of you that joined us this evening. As I said, this is going to be something that I hope we'll have more live chats about. And not necessarily about St. Bridget, but other wonderful topics. And thank you and good night. It's 8:02 and I wanted to keep this to an hour. So I am really grateful to everybody.
Thank you everyone. And if the technology has cooperated, we will be posting a recording of this on the YouTube channel. So you can revisit your favorite parts of the discussion.
There was lots. I don't know which one mine would be. But again, thank you, Mael.
I might have to listen to it all again.
Yes. Have a lovely evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Very much. Thanks.
Thank you, Anne.
And just so you know, our president of the United Irish Cultural Center is here with us tonight. His name is Liam Reedy. Liam, will you just say hi to our guests?
Hello, everybody. I'm delighted to be on here for what is Anne's first live Zoom event with an invited guest from San Antonio and also a visitor from Vancouver. It's amazing we're doing this, you know, after the pandemic. That's bringing so many people together all over the world with similar interests. So I'm glad that Anne is past president since December of the United Irish Cultural Center, and we're glad to have her back, which is not something that happens a lot with outgoing presidents, but we have her back and keeping her busy on cultural programming for the year. So I hope this is the first of many events throughout the year on the cultural calendar. So we're delighted to be involved in this. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Jennifer, for all of your tech stuff. And we got this going. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm going to leave this going for just a moment. There's I want to put a couple of links from the library's resources into the chat for people in terms of books and all.
Okay.
And I assume you have a mailing list. Do you want to put the URL for that or something? Because I wouldn't mind signing up.
Oh, wonderful. Great. We'll do that. Sister Mary Teresa, you want to be on our mailing list?
Yes, please. I was going to tell Liam that back in 1978, it was probably before he was born, I visited the Irish Center in San Francisco on my way to Australia one time.
We'd be delighted to have you back, and
would be nice.
Visit post-dates my birthday.
Sister Mary Teresa, you'll have to come out and visit us again, and we'll show you our wonderful library. We have, and Mael, if you're ever in San Francisco, come on down, you know, and we have this wonderful library and there's so many wonderful resources in it. And so Jennifer will be more than happy. And it's one of my favorite places, the library. It really is.